There's a lot of talk these days about the COVID-19 virus and whether or not God caused it. Some are even suggesting that the virus and businesses being shut down and the spike in online activity and the financial implications, they're saying that it's all the providence of God. What does that even mean? What is the providence of God? That's what we're going to talk about for the next several minutes. What is providence, and how does God work in the lives of mankind today? Now, to begin, I want to suggest to you that there are a lot of different views with regard to how God works in our lives today. One view, the first view, would be, of course, the atheist view. The atheist believes that God is not working at all in our lives today because the atheist doesn't believe that God exists. They would say we are alone in the universe. A second view is the Calvinist view. The Calvinist view is that everything that happens in life is predestined to happen, and that everything happens for a reason. Nothing is left to chance, but rather every event happens because God wanted it to happen. A third view we're going to call the deist view. The deist believes that there is a God, but that He doesn't interact with us at all. He sees all, but He does nothing. The fourth view we're calling the charismatic view. This view holds that God is working in our lives today and frequently through the use of miracles. And so, if a piano is going to fall on your head, God will divinely, miraculously guide you out of the way so that the piano doesn't fall on your head. But of course, there's one problem with that view, and that is that sometimes people that hold that view have pianos fall on their head. But friends, none of these views is consistent with what the Bible teaches about providence. None of these views properly represents the way that God works in our lives today. I want to suggest to you that God works in our lives today providentially. Now again, what do we mean by that? What is providence? In truth, the word providence is hardly found in the Bible at all. In the King James Bible, it's found only one time. In other translations, it's not found at all. It's a word that is unknown in the Bible. In fact, the one time that it occurs in the King James Version is in Acts chapter 24 and verse 2, but there it's not even talking about God's providence. It's talking about a Roman official and the fact that he was the one providing. But the absence of that word does not mean that God doesn't provide. Friends, God's providing is seen throughout the Bible. In fact, you can see the word provide in the word providence, providence. The prefix pro means before, and the vidence part of the word in English has to do with being able to see. In fact, we get our English word video from the same root word. Providence literally then means to see before. God in heaven sees beforehand. In fact, if you look up the definition of the word provision, it says something like this: a measure taken beforehand to deal with a need or contingency. And that's what we're talking about, that God, in His power and His might, sees in advance my needs, and He operates in the natural world so as to take care of us. God works in our lives, and He provides for us, He cares for us, He looks out for us through His providence. All right, that's all introductory. Here's the first point that I want us to notice. This is very important. I want us to discuss the difference in providence and miracles. Friends, there have been times in the past when God has provided for His people, but He did so by the means of miracles. When Jesus fed the 5,000 in Matthew chapter 14, He made provision for their physical means, but He did so in a miraculous way. Now, what does that mean? It means that He set aside natural laws and He miraculously intervened. When God parted the Red Sea in Exodus chapter 14, He provided for the Israelites and their safety. He protected them, but He did so by the means of a miracle. And so He stepped in and just parted the Red Sea. That never happens naturally. Now, on occasions such as this, when God steps in, He abruptly interrupts nature and natural law. But even in Bible times, now listen to this, this is very important to our point. Even in Bible times, miracles were the exception rather than the rule. I think some of us have mistakenly believed that from the beginning of the Bible until the close of the book of Revelation, that God has constantly been working miracles. And that because God is not working miracles today, that would mean that God is not involved in our lives today. I want to ask you a question. When you ate supper last night or breakfast this morning and you enjoyed that meal, where did that bread come from that you ate? Did God provide the bread for you? Of course He did. The water that you had with your meal, did God provide the water? Absolutely He did. Now here's the question. Is there a difference in the source of the water that miraculously came out of the rock in Exodus chapter 17 and the water that was sitting on your dining room table with your meal? Friends, there's no difference at all. God provided both of them. And the fact that He did not provide it miraculously for you doesn't change the fact that God provided it. Did you know that there are only 5 times in the Bible when there is just an abundance of miracles? Number 1, the first time in the Bible when there's an abundance of miracles is at the creation. Of course, there's an abundance of miracles there just by the very nature of the creation. But the second time, number 2, is at the Exodus. When the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, you have the plagues, you have the parting of the Red Sea, you have the giving of the 10 Commandments. But after the Israelites get into the Promised Land, how many miracles are there? You get beyond Jericho and you will be troubled to find an abundance of miracles other than Joshua causing the sun to stand still. Now, was God not working with them when they were capturing city after city and nation after nation? Of course He was. The third time in the Bible when you find an abundance of miracles is during the work of Elijah and Elisha. You've got 7 miracles of Elijah, 14 miracles of Elisha, so we have a total of 21 miracles there. Now, what was the purpose of those miracles? Why are they there? The purpose was to confirm these prophets of God and to show that the message that they were delivering came from God. God authenticated the office of the prophet through miracles. And friends, as a matter of fact, that has always been the purpose of miracles, to confirm the message and to confirm the messenger. Think about this. In Egypt, when God sends Moses to Pharaoh, of course, at that time Moses did a miracle, and the purpose was to confirm Moses the messenger. At Mount Sinai, there were miracles that took place. The purpose was to confirm the message, to confirm that it was a law from God. The purpose of miracles was to confirm the message and the messenger. The fourth time, number 4, the fourth time in the Bible when you have an abundance of miracles is when Daniel gets over into Babylon. Now, why would there be miracles at that time? Because he's in a pagan land and God's messenger needed to be made known. And so you've got the interpreting of the dreams of Nebuchadnezzar, you've got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, you've got Daniel in the lion's den. Now again, why? God was authenticating His messengers. Now the 5th time in the Bible when you have an abundance of miracles is during the time of Jesus and the apostles. But friends, you get beyond those 5 times and you just don't find a lot of miracles where you have just one after another. But get this, that doesn't mean that God was not working. You see, miracles have always been the exception. In fact, that's why people were amazed when they saw them. They weren't used to seeing them. Now, what's my point? The point is, miracles have been rare, but God has always worked in the lives of mankind. You know, sometimes people will say, well, you folks don't believe in miracles, and so you don't believe that God is working today. First, we do believe in miracles. We believe in every miracle that is listed in the Bible, but we also believe in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, Ephesians chapter 4, and other passages that tell us that miracles have now ceased. But secondly, just because we don't believe in miracles today does not mean that we don't believe that God is working in our lives today. Of course He is. You see, throughout history, most of God's workings have not been through miracles. Oftentimes today, when speaking, we make a distinction between miracles and providence. And what we mean is that God is working in our lives today, but He's not interrupting natural laws as He did with the miracle, but rather He is working within natural laws. And so, if a brother is in the hospital and we pray that God will help him, we don't expect a miracle to occur. We don't expect a man's ruptured heart to just poof and be fixed. We don't expect a man with a severed limb to just whoop and his arm just grows back. What we mean when we pray for that man is that God will work through the doctors and through the nurses and through natural healing processes to restore this brother. Sometimes people will say, well, if you don't believe in miracles, then you don't believe that God is powerful today. Oh, I reject that wholeheartedly. Friends, I want you to consider the power involved in that prayer for a brother in the hospital. How is God going to answer that prayer? Perhaps years before, God seeing before, remember the definition of providence? Years before, God seeing before, He's already arranging circumstances. And so maybe a man goes to medical school and he moves to your city, and due to a change in his schedule, he ends up being your doctor on this particular day. And I don't know what all's involved in God's providence, but what I'm saying is the power involved in arranging all of the circumstances, the power involved in God taking care of us and answering our prayers within the natural realm. That's amazing. God is working in the world today providentially, not miraculously. All right, a second point that I want us to observe, and you've got to listen very carefully to this one. You cannot recognize specific acts of providence unless God tells you. Now, what do I mean by that? With a miracle, it is obvious that God is the one doing the providing. In fact, that's kind of the point of a miracle, that it is from God. But there are other times when God provides and God works in a non-miraculous way, we would say providentially. Let me give you a Bible example of this. I want you to think about Joseph. Joseph goes down into the land of Egypt. And I want you to think about all the things that transpire in Egypt. You know, you go back to his coat of many colors and his brothers sell him into slavery, and he's in Potiphar's house and he's working for Pharaoh, and finally he's in a position to be able to provide food for his family during the famine. And when you get to the end of the story, Joseph says to his brothers in Genesis 45:8, God sent me before you to this place. Then in Genesis 15 verse 20, Joseph said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. How do we know that all of this was God's plan? It's not miraculous. It's natural events that have transpired over all these years. How do we know that it was God's plan? We know it because Joseph, speaking by inspiration, tells us it was God's plan. I know it because the Bible tells me so. Friends, the life of Joseph is a wonderful example of God working in the lives of men through providence, not miracles, but providence. Sometimes in our individual lives, we may see something happening and we may be tempted to say, this is the providence of God. This is God working in my life. And it may be providence. It may not be providence. The point I'm making is we really don't have any way of knowing. And as children of God, we need to be careful about this. Now, we know, of course, from James 1 and verse 17 that every good gift and every perfect gift comes from God. There is not a single good thing that's ever come into your life that did not come from God. But the danger that we sometimes face is looking at specific things and saying, God made this happen. Let me see if I can illustrate this. Again, a Bible illustration. I want you to think about the story of Esther and Mordecai. And again, think about all of the events, all of the things that happened there. You think about how the king's wife, Vashti, she respected modesty. And she refused to come out and let the king's cronies look on her. And so she ended up being removed as queen. And so the king is looking for a new queen. And then there's a time when Mordecai saves the life of the king, but the king forgets to reward him until later. And then you think about how out of all of the people chosen to be a new queen, Esther, who is a Jew, ends up being put in the position of the queen just at the same time, coincidentally, that Haman decides he's going to kill off the Jews, God's people. Now think about all of the daily events in this story. These are not miraculous. These are just daily events. Think about all of these things, and yet when the day comes that Esther is in a position to save the lives of the Jews, listen to the words of Mordecai in Esther 4 and verse 14. Mordecai says to Esther, Esther, who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Friends, I want you to think about that. Mordecai says, who knows? He did not say, God absolutely put you in this time and this place for this purpose. This is the hand of God. You know why he didn't say that? We never know that apart from direct revelation from God. Mordecai says, who knows? Maybe this is the plan of God. Maybe this is God's workings. Friends, how exciting is it to think about the events in your life, and who knows if God put you in this place for such a time as this. Maybe you have the job you do because it's the providence of God. Maybe you being there will result in a coworker becoming a Christian, and maybe not even now. Maybe you're planting a seed that's going to grow later. I believe with all of my heart that if a person is truly seeking the truth, that he will be able to find it. Now, why do I believe that? I believe that because in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus promised that if we seek, we will find. I believe that because Acts 17 and verse 27 says that man is made in such a way that he will seek the Lord and that God is not far from any of us. I believe it because Romans 1 and verse 20 says there is innate evidence of God in nature itself, so that we are without excuse. I believe it because 2 Peter 3 and verse 9 says God wants all men to be saved. Tie all of that together and go back to Matthew 7. The promise to the true seeker is that he will find. And so I conclude that God will providentially make a way for a true seeker so that he will have the ability and the opportunity to find the truth. Now, how's he going to work that out? Maybe it will be through me. Maybe the house that I choose to move into, or maybe the job that I take where I get hired, maybe I'm going to provide that true seeker an opportunity. There have been times in my life that I have been tempted to say, this is the providence of God. This is God's working. But the point that I'm making right now is, without direct revelation from God, I can't say for sure. I don't really know that. But friends, isn't life exciting when each day God may be using me? Here's another Bible example. Think about the Apostle Paul and Onesimus and Philemon. Now, Onesimus was a runaway slave, and he flees to Rome. He ran away from Philemon. And it just so happens that Paul knows Philemon. Well, Paul ends up being taken to Rome, and I want you to think about all of the events that transpired to get Paul to be in Rome at the same time that Onesimus was there. And there were individuals who would probably say, well, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that Paul was there for 2 years in Caesarea because God wanted him to be there, and there was the shipwreck and all the things that transpired, and then the circumstances under which Onesimus ran away, and some people would say God made Onesimus run away, and God brought Paul and Onesimus together, and he became a Christian, and they would say God made all of this happen. But I want you to listen to this. Do you know how the Bible talks about this? When Paul writes Philemon, verse 15, when he writes to Philemon, this is what he says. He says, Philemon, perhaps Onesimus departed from you for this very purpose. Perhaps. Friends, do you know how exciting that makes life? To look on every event, just ordinary daily events, and say, perhaps I'm in this person's life for such a time as this. Perhaps this person is in my life for such a time as this. Life is unbelievably exciting. Maybe on your way home today, maybe on my way home, I'll stop and I'll have a conversation with somebody who's looking for the truth. Those of you who may be Bible class teachers, who knows if maybe there's some young man in your Bible class who will become a great gospel preacher. and change the world by the souls he reaches, how exciting life becomes when you consider that perhaps God is using me for this great purpose. Several years ago, there was a man in prison. He was on death row. A member of the church in another state sent him a Bible correspondence course in the mail. The man worked through it, and he decided that he wanted to become a Christian. He wanted to be baptized. But the chaplain, the warden at the prison, would not allow him to do so because he's on death row, and death row inmates weren't allowed to leave death row. They said it was too big of a risk. And so the lady who had sent him the course found a Church of Christ near the prison, and she called. I answered the phone. She explained to me the situation, and I called the prison, and I talked to the chaplain. He refused to allow this to happen. I persisted. I kept trying to work out a plan. Finally, they agreed that we could bring in a large rolling laundry bin, these large ones on wheels, and we could line it with plastic. And we could take a water hose outside and fill it up in a caged area in the wintertime. They finally then brought the man out in shackles. He had several guards. And they picked this man up and they put him into this frigid water, and they allowed me to dunk him, to baptize him. In fact, I had a hard time getting him back up out of this little cart because of the shackles on his hands and his feet. When they got him out, I said to him, "Welcome, brother." And they took him away, and I never saw him again, and they executed him soon afterwards. Do you believe that Providence was working in this man's life? Friends, it sure seems like it to me. You know, in one sense, God was certainly providing, because He provided the gospel, He provided the church, He provided an individual to be a gospel preacher. But did God cause it to happen this way? That's another question. 1 year ago, almost exactly now, I was involved in a four-wheeler accident that has left me a paraplegic. I will more than likely spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair. But you know, that accident and my injury has opened some doors to me that I would likely never have had opened. After my accident, we were having to have my home modified, remodeled, so that I could get my wheelchair from one room to another. During the remodeling phase, I was able to teach and baptize 4 of the contractors who were working on my house. I have been invited to speak at a conference of financial investors and to tell my story and to talk to them about the Bible. A video that I did about my accident went viral, and it's been watched by many people who may never otherwise have heard the truth. So, do I believe that God caused the accident? I absolutely do not believe that. I do not believe that God goes around crashing people on four-wheelers. But I do believe that He can use the accident providentially to reach people with the truth. Absolutely, I believe that. Now, what about the COVID-19 virus? Did God cause that? In truth, I believe that man caused that. But do I believe that God can and has providentially used it? I do believe that. In the last month, while this virus and this lockdown has been going on, the web traffic at World Video Bible School has been up 40%. That means a lot more people are watching videos of biblical teaching. The online Bible school enrollment at World Video Bible School is at an all-time high. There are 30 new students per day and over 200 per week. And their YouTube page is adding over 260 new subscribers each and every day. At the Gospel Broadcasting Network, where I work full-time, we have seen similar spikes in viewership, and some of our recent video posts have set records for our organization. Dear friend, as we conclude our discussion today, maybe you've been searching for the truth. You know, it very well may be the providence of God that brought you to watch this video today.